It's been roughly a year and a half since we saw a surge of Central American immigrants at our southern border. With that in mind, we set out to answer some questions. After being released, did they show up for their immigration hearings? And are they being allowed to stay, or are they being deported? We hope the answers would be clear-cut, but that was far from the case.
One mother that we spoke to said, my child stays here in Honduras, they face certain death. If he takes the journey to the U.S., he might survive. So possible survival is still better than his certain death.
Melissa Lopez is the executive director of Diocesan Migrant and Refugee Services. When facilities in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas were overwhelmed last summer, she worked with many of the immigrants processed in El Paso before they were handed a court date and sent to other parts of the country.
When there's a constant influx of children, we are trying to get out there as quickly as we can to make sure that they know all about their rights and that we can warn them about things like, not showing up to your immigration hearing has consequences.
Are they showing up for these hearings?
It's been our experience that they are showing up. We have not had children that have just absconded and disappeared from the docket in huge numbers.
But I wanted concrete numbers. My first attempt to answer that question started with the U.S. Border Patrol. They couldn't answer that question, but I did confirm nearly 69,000 unaccompanied minors entered the U.S. through Mexico in fiscal year 2014, a majority from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. In fiscal year 2015, that number dropped 42% to fewer than 40,000. The Border Patrol recommended I reach out to Immigration and Customs Enforcement under the Department of Homeland Security to get numbers on deportations and immigration hearings. ICE promised me deportation numbers, but despite close to a month of trying, those numbers never came. So I tried the Office of Refugee Resettlement.
ORR goes through the process of trying to reunite them with either a family member that's in the United States or a family friend.
The ORR wanted to help but told me to reach out to the Executive Office for Immigration Review, which is part of the Justice Department. They told me from July 18, 2014 through December 23, 2014, nearly 21,000 new cases involving unaccompanied children were identified. More than 4,000 have been completed. 77% were given removal orders. 69% of those were in absentia. They didn't show up for their hearings. The tracking system appears to be flawed, correct?
Absolutely. The tracking system is built on trust, saying that you'll show up when you say you're going to show up.
Victor Manjarres is a one-time Border Patrol sector chief and currently the project director for UTEP's Center for Law and Human Behavior. He predicted last summer's surge.
Initially, it was close to 70% that weren't showing up. Now the numbers come down a little bit. It's closer to 45, 46%. It'll probably stabilize at that number because that's really the pull that you're dealing with. So you're saying 1 and 2 is showing up. They could have started going to Chicago. Now they could be in New York. They could be just about anywhere.
One more organization I reached out to, the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse at Syracuse University. Based on their analysis, I can tell you the average wait time for an immigration hearing is now nearly 3 years. And when a juvenile shows up and has a lawyer, he or she has about a 50% chance of staying in the U.S. 9 out of 10 who show up without a lawyer end up deported.
Rick, interesting story. Thank you. In Las Cruces, another property in the heart of the city has remained untouched for years. Residents say it's an eyesore. From our New Mexico Mobile Newsroom, behind a chain-link fence is the skeleton of an unfinished project. We don't know what it was supposed to be, but the city says it's privately owned, and 8 years ago, construction suddenly stopped. It's located on Main Street.